So, why ancient Egyptians white or black? Um, so, Herodotus does mention a few things that will make you kind of have an idea of the race of the people who are in Egypt when he went there. Uh, the question of the race of the Egyptians is one that is, if, it's even contentious. Like there are people who so much want it to be that the ancient Egyptians were black, and there are those who have for a long time been of the opinion that the ancient Egyptians were white. So reading through Herodotus' book, and especially what he calls Book 2, which is about Egypt, and Herodotus does a good job at going into detail about everything about ancient Egypt. Uh, gives us this background information, of course, before he tells us the capture of Egypt by Cambyses, the Persian king. Yeah, so reading through the book, I think now I think we look at ancient Egypt with biases that we have from our own current political situations. And I mean like maybe the last 200-300 years. So especially, and these biases especially come from particularly Western Europe and North America. So I think we might be going wrong if we approach the question of the race of the people of ancient Egypt with that backdrop of whatever that has happened in the last maybe 300-400 years as far as race is concerned. There has been history of slavery, um, and that slavery for the last like maybe 500 years was based on skin color, and that kind of tainted how we might view history that came before, because slavery has not always been based on color. People of all races have been slaves. It wasn't based in color, in particular during the times of Herodotus. So all kinds of people would be captured and sold as slaves. Race was not an issue, or it was not a determinant of that. Now, because of the fact that at some point race got linked to slavery not long ago, now we have this issue of when we look at things that have happened way back, we tend to think that it has always been like that. Like, so now this conversation around the race of the Egyptians is always tied to that question of superiority of race. And now, Herodotus, while he describes everything in detail about Egyptians and other peoples he came across, he seemed not to have focused so much on their skin tone. He does mention here and there, but in my previous video, I mentioned that Herodotus does say that people who live to the south of, the far south you go, especially in what they call Libya, the darker the people became because of the heat. But it doesn't tend to bring up the question of skin as a political issue or class issue. It does not. And in some parts of the book, he does talk about the Phoenicians going to West Africa and trading with local people there. It doesn't bring up the question of the skin color. It seems the more important identity in the world of Herodotus was tribe. The tribe was more important than how you looked. So now coming back to Egypt, there is a point where Herodotus does mention that the Egyptians were dark-skinned. Now, dark-skinned can be relative. Now, darker than who, that's important. We just say dark-skinned. It could be like not dark-skinned like me, or it could have been dark-skinned like me. Uh, and then there is this one story he tells when he's explaining the where the religion, explain the religious aspect of the Egyptian society, and he explains that the Greeks acquired their religion from Egyptians, which I found to be so interesting. And as part of that um, narrative, he says that he went to Thebes in Egypt, and he was speaking to priests and priestesses, mostly priests, because he says in Egypt the priests usually or mostly men, but not always. And he says he made some inquiries about the relationship between the Egyptian religion and the Greek religion, and he also did go to some parts of Greece. In particular, he mentions Dodona, and he also went to Libya, and he had conversations about religion and the similarities between the Egyptian religion and the Greek religion and other religions. I'm going to create another video on religion. It's not about religion, it's about race. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because he was told the Greeks copied the Egyptian religion, even the 12 gods. They used different names, but initially it was just the Egyptian gods that they copied and started worshipping. Now, he says that initially, even the first oracle in Greece, in the oracle of Dodona, he calls it, and the oracle at the temple of Ammon in Libya, these were two ladies who were captured or taken kind of by force from a temple in Thebes, and they were called the two black doves. And the one in Dodona became the first oracle in Greek land. And if you read this book, you realize that an oracle was such an important person in society. It was this person who everybody considered to be the mouth of the gods. And if the state or even private citizens wanted to know what to do or not what not to do, they had to go and consult the oracle. So the first oracle in Greekland was a woman, and he was one of the two black doves. And Herodotus explains that they were called doves because they came to the land not speaking the language of the land, and they were called black because they were black women. And in fact, he says specifically they were called black to imply that they were Egyptians. So, which leaves you thinking, okay, Egyptians must have been at least dark skinned. We don't know how dark, but it's dark skinned. Um, and then, but here's another thing I found interesting that I had never thought about or I did not know about. Egyptians were not homogeneous. So that's another thing you need to bear in mind when you're trying to consider whether Egyptians were black or white, is that they were not an homogeneous society, as we tend to think when we come across the question of Egyptians' race. Herodotus gives one example where he talks about this one group of people who were Egyptians, but they were requesting the gods through the oracle to allow them to eat cow, beef, because in much of Egypt, it was not accepted to kill cows and mostly even animals to or eat them. So there was this group of people, and their excuse was, we have our own language, we are Egyptians, but we have our own language, and so we think that rule of not eating cow should not apply to us. And they were told, no, you're still Egyptians. And then there's this other story Herodotus tells of this other group. No, it's not really a story, it's just a description of the cuisine basically. And he says that some parts of Egypt, they didn't eat crocodiles. They saw it as what is the name, like it's kind of like a special kind of animal. And in others, they in the particular part of Egypt, they were eating the crocodiles. So that leaves you with the idea that the Egyptian society was not homogeneous. It was a society made up of groups of different tribes, basically. There is also the question of intermarriage. Herodotus does give us this explanation, basically, of, or it does bring up uh, incidences of Egyptians intermarrying with Greeks in particular. So there was a lot of intermarriage, and also between the Egyptians and the Persians and the Assyrians and the Phoenicians. In fact, the entire book of Herodotus, in the initial stages of his book, does talk about the abduction of, I think it was either Egyptian or Phoenician girls and taken to Egypt, or the other way. I might be wrong on that. But the point is, there was a lot of intermarriage in that world. So that tells you that it's so difficult to even decide what race the Egyptians were. It's most likely they were their own race, not necessarily black, not necessarily white, or they were a mix of. Because Herodotus also mentioned that there were particular towns where people of Greek origin lived. Um, so you see, so what I'm saying is the question of the race of Egyptian is very complicated, and maybe it's more like asking yourself, are Americans white or black? I think it's something similar. How would you say, what is the race of an American? Is an American white or is an American black? So there are black Americans, there are white Americans, there are Asian, whatever, but they're all American. So I think it's for Egypt, it was kind of the same thing. And remember, Egypt was such a popular place in the ancient world. Herodotus tells us that Egypt was so attractive, and that part of the world, Herodotus describes it as the place that had the perfect environment for human development and human health, even because he says Egyptians and the Libyans were the healthiest people he ever met, and he attributed that to the environment, because those parts of the world were neither cold nor warm. The weather did not change drastically, like say in Persia or in Lydia, where there's winter, strong cold, and then there's summer. So he says these people are the healthiest because they lived in an environment that did not change that much. So, anyways, the peoples of Egypt, it's hard. I don't think I think we simplify the question of race so much, and we also come into it with our biases that we've acquired in the last maybe 400-500 years, and in particular the bias that comes with the moment when slavery became somehow, or slavery was determined by race, which has not always been the case. And this is something that is not said a lot, that there was a time in history when race was not what determined for you to be a slave. No, it wasn't. People of all colors could become slaves, and people of all colors could become slave masters. So when we got into this era where slavery or skin color started to determine who becomes a slave and who doesn't, now we acquired a certain bias, and now we take that bias with us when we try to go and interrogate the race of the people of Egypt. Yeah, so to cut the story short, Egyptians were dark skinned, at least some of them were dark skinned, but in that age, skin color was not a major issue. It seems, by reading Herodotus' book, the entire of it, it was more of tribe, which tribe you belong to. Then the tribe determined a lot of things, but not your skin color. And skin did not form tribe. And I think it makes sense to me. Sorry for taking this longer than I wanted to, as someone who is born and brought up in Africa, because I think for us who, and I don't think it's only Africa. I think there are other parts of the world. If you were born and brought up there, then you start to you grow knowing that tribe is more important than your skin color. And for us, for example, here in Africa, East Africa, Kenya in particular, tribe is more important. All of us might look black, but some people will call somebody else brother and another not brother based on their tribe or their skin color. So I think that's the dynamics that were more in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, and maybe, and probably, and most likely, the entire region of the old world.